Coming up, while the Brooklyn Nets season was unraveling on the court, behind the scenes, the wheels were in motion. We break down the Shams Charania reporting around the short list of candidates for the Brooklyn Nets as their new head coach. Chief among them, familiar face to the NBA, Coach Budenholzer. Let's dive in on the candidates and the impact in Brooklyn coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day where we're having fun. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Arbach. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We're on 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it. I've got a competitive side. And as a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist is on the classic Monopoly game. So you join your friends and download Monopoly Go now for free in the App Store or on Google Play. And what we're going to be downloading, Doug, is a healthy dose of speculation as Shams Charania taps into not only where the Nets are on their coaching search now, but apparently where they've been. This was not a team, as we've often been suspicious of, a little behind the times, not being proactive. They got into this coaching search well before this season concluded.
Yeah, I wish I had known this when I made my Kevin Ollie might be back as coach proclamation.
I hate signing off on your predictions without. I have to do better research. That's on me.
I walked that one back pretty quick, I think. Okay. So this was interesting to take a look at some of the names that are now being floated as possibly even finalists for the coaching job. They could still be far down where it's a little unclear to know where they are in the process. In terms of like just how many interviews have been with each. Like I said, this came out well after some of these interviews had taken place that no one seemed to know about, and so it's a little hard to know exactly as we record this Monday, April 15th, to know exactly where they are in the process. But the three names that have emerged as maybe the three finalists for the Nets coaching job for next year: Mike Budenholzer, who's easily the best known guy of the bunch, Jordi Fernandez, and Kevin Young, who are two assistants right now. And so, I guess we can start with Coach Bud, and there's probably some polarity around, sort of how people view him as a coach, talk about sort of some of the things that he would possibly bring to the table. But it's clear, one, that they have a probably longer list of maybe like potential candidates than I at least originally gave them probably credit for, which was my bad. And two, there could be the possibility of landing a big name or at least an up-and-coming name into the coaching ranks here for the Nets, which is a really, really good sign, I think, at least from these group of guys that were thrown out there in the initial culling.
Yeah, and it represents two different tracks, right? Potentially here, veteran, experienced name like Coach Bud, and what that would mean, we think, or we'll speculate for the offseason and players you might try to attract, trades you might make, versus going with the next hot name that's maybe in line for a head coaching role, and what that would mean for the young core and how they want to build things going forward. Mentioning the Shams Charania article here too in The Athletic, Joe Tsai is going to be holding in-person finalist meetings with all three of those names mentioned by Doug, and a final decision, at least as speculated, is looming in the near future. I do love near future because we've been on these timelines before. That's all relative. Near future in the spectrum of existence could be next week, could be next month. But if we talk about Coach Bud at the highest level, is a guy that clearly has pedigree, right? Has a tenure in Atlanta, is successful early on with them. That slowly year over year diminishes. Conference final appearance, semifinals, out in the first round, misses playoffs. But then he pivots over to Milwaukee, where you have one of the best talents in the league in Giannis. He gets that thing on track fairly quickly. They win a title. And then for on-court and then also off-court around his personal life, there ends up being a parting of ways there, and he takes a year away from basketball. Unlike other names like, say, Doc Rivers, who's now coaching the Milwaukee Bucks, Coach Bud feels like a guy that needed the time away, but was going to be the next hottest candidate when a team needed a coach, as opposed to was he long in the tooth on the bench and maybe, beyond his prime for being a coach.
Yeah, I mean, this would easily be the best get, for the Nets, to the point where I'd almost maybe I'm just maybe I have low self-esteem where it comes to the Nets, but like I'm like, I'd be surprised if he took the job. But look, with Budenholzer, well, let me get the first piece out of the way, which is the criticism. The criticisms of Budenholzer in the past have been inability to pivot at certain times during playoff series that have cost the team, just series. Like they've ended up
Deeper
losing
runs, deeper runs,
yeah,
or
deeper
meeting
runs because they were
expectations, maybe, right?
unable to get away from the core stylistic and strategic pieces that he had put in place for his teams. That is really kind of like the only criticism. Now, it's a big one when you hit the highest level, but it also sort of washes away that he had his teams in these places like year in, year out, right? Like that he had gotten his teams to these places time and time again on the back of well thought out and planned coaching, like styles that fit the teams that he was coaching and that clearly worked. I mean, people forget easily that like he was the guy that unlocked Giannis. Like Jason Kidd got fired. There was a couple months of Joe Prunty, and then Budenholzer basically changed the entire scheme and made Giannis, didn't make Giannis, but was able to unlock Giannis into this like MVP best in basketball guy. And
had the ability to see that Giannis is one of the best players in the league, right?
Yeah,
we need to build,
and that gets like totally forgotten because again, expectations change, right? You get good and the expectations change. We say this all the time. It's like you're only as good as the expectation. So with Budenholzer, there's a clear piece of like a fundamental approach on understanding like sort of what they want to do schematically, right? Like take away shots at the rim, take away 3-pointers, allow as many 2-pointers as possible, play a very similar. They played a lot of drop defense, obviously with Brook Lopez to really great acclaim. But, you can make the case that they were using that because that was the best form of like the defensive of the guys that they had, right? Now they had a little trouble getting away from it when at critical times, but in general, like career 602 winning percentage, well respected in the game. And another thing that kind of gets washed away too is that final year his brother died during the playoffs. Like
I made
in a
reference
car
to
accident
at the top, and it was like felt somewhat insane the way that unfolded for him in Milwaukee.
Totally insane. Insane. Like he was coaching, his brother died in a car crash. He was coaching through this thing and never really talked about it really, right? But like was clearly coaching through, a devastating, it's not even a good word for it. It's like beyond that thing in his personal life. And then gets fired, 10 minutes later. And so it was just this crazy turn of events. So I think to me, this isn't even close. Like this guy is total proven track record, is I think fairly malleable with different personnel. I'm not sure. Nets clearly don't have the Bucks. They're not a team made up like the Bucks, but also probably the understanding is that this team's not going to look in 1 year like it looks now. And so, is that where you stand? I think I saw this name and I was like, holy cow, do it. Don't even pause.
No, listen, we're talking about Coach Bud and listen, point of order here. It's a 604 win percentage. That that 0.02 really matters here, Doug. 10 seasons coaching, coach of the year with the Atlanta Hawks in 2015, with the Milwaukee Bucks in 2019, only 2 below 500 seasons over his coaching tenure. And just to your point, like I think when we talked about, when you brought up Kevin Ollie and saying, hey, that's the path forward, and you said we walked that idea back pretty quickly. However, the thing I thought that felt right was name a high-profile coach that you're going to easily bring in here and say, this is your job and you can start to reshape this thing. Worst case scenario, for whatever the deficiencies we think that Coach Bud may have adjusting in playoff basketball, he's a guy that's going to get you to the playoffs. He's a guy that's going to incrementally make your team better year over year. And if you're looking for stability and credibility, then this is the kind of coaching candidate that you probably want to hire. It doesn't mean he's the only one and that I necessarily think it's the perfect path forward here. But coming up in a second, we'll talk about the pace and space play on the offensive end, talk about the Nets personnel, the speculation of adding a high-level talent, and whether or not hiring Coach Bud would be the 1A of a 2-step plan to really go big in this offseason. We'll get into that in just one moment.
All right, let you know this next segment is brought to us by our sponsor, BetterHelp. Look, we've talked about this before. Sometimes you just need the opportunity to get things off your chest. You got those big things, you got the small things, maybe just the stuff that starts to get to you. It's important to let it out. It's important to tell it to someone who's unbiased in your life. It's important to get started with BetterHelp and online therapy today. Look, this is the kind of thing you can get authentically sad, upset, excited. All that stuff is good to let out in a way that can feel not only healthy, but also moving you forward, right? Like this is the whole thing with therapy. It's like taking the things that you're doing really well in your life, really expanding on them, and then trying to work on the stuff that just needs a little work. This is where BetterHelp can step in with an online therapist that's suited for your needs. You take an online quiz, they're going to pair you with someone that works for you. It doesn't work, you just switch it anytime. That's no big deal. BetterHelp wants to find just someone that works on working with you. If you're thinking of starting online therapy today, give BetterHelp a try. Entirely online, designed to be flexible. It's totally suited to your schedule. You just visit betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA. You're going to get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA.
All right, so as we roll along on what is a somewhat breaking news cycle for the Brooklyn Nets, the season just concludes, the play-in tournament, the playoffs are coming, not for Brooklyn, and they had to turn their attention, and apparently already have turned their attention to a critical coaching search here for them. When we think about Coach Bud, and I think we could apply this to, hey, say there's a dark horse candidate, a veteran experienced coach that we haven't heard the name yet, throw his hat in the ring. I think it would apply to all these guys. When you think about the stability it would bring and the impact it would bring to the offseason, would you assume, I would, that hiring Coach Budenholzer means Mikal Bridges, Cameron Johnson, like that core staying here? You still want to develop the young guys, but it increases the likelihood that Sean Marks is going to the trade market and saying, okay, what does it take to get a Donovan Mitchell, or who else can shake free here? We're going to bring in talent that dramatically increases what the floor of this team is going into next season.
I think that's what that has to be the bill of goods you're selling a new coach, right? Like especially a guy like this that has,
right, ready to invest.
Awesome pedigree, is still in coaching sort of years. Like we're not talking too long in the tooth here, right? Around some other guys, has not been out of basketball very long. Like these are the kinds of things you probably have to sell a guy like that. It's like, okay, you're taking a look at this team, you see what it is now. These are our plans. I'm sure that has to be part of the discussion. It's like, where our plan is to trade for X or Y or Z. These are the kind of players we're targeting. These are the kind of moves that we're going to make in the next couple of years. Because obviously, if you look at the current roster, it's really it's a little harder to tell the story. I mean, maybe some coach could look and say, hey, I would have done X, Y, and Z differently. But in the end, you're not walking into a team that has Giannis, right? That you're not walking into a team that even has like Kevin Durant or Kyrie Irving when they had those guys, and you can maybe sell, or not even maybe, you could sell a superstar team to a coach, right? Like this Nets team doesn't have it. So there has to be a little creativity in looking forward. But overall, like, I mean, right? I mean, is that wrong? I mean, it feels like it'd be insane to not have that part of the conversation. They seem like it's not even a work in progress. They just are so incomplete right now.
And I think too, for me, if it was a guy, someone like Coach Bud, you're also thinking about it from his perspective looking in. So, we talk about Young or Fernandez, assistant coaches they're coming up the ranks. And they probably look at the players and personnel in a similar way. But Coach Bud has experience as a head coach. No disrespect to Kevin Ollie, but he may look at it and go, oh, well, I can do better with Mikal Bridges. I can do better with Cam Johnson, right? Like there are players here that we think have settled, maybe a little bit regressed back to their mean coming over from Phoenix, but he may look at it and say, oh, this is an underachievement. When I look at the Brooklyn Nets roster, I'm not telling you we're a 50-win team, but we're closer to 40 wins than 30 wins if I'm at the helm of this. And then you have the young talent and the other moves that you're going to make. So maybe as a baseline, it's a bit more attractive than, say, we talked about Monty Williams in Detroit in the offseason. It's all young, here's all the money in the world. You can build it however you want, but that it's from the ground up. Maybe the cupboard does not appear as bare for a veteran experienced coach who feels like I have systems in place that can just make this team better just from me being in the room.
Yeah, like he was like groundbreaking. Like he was like pretty pivotal in pushing for like NBA defenses at the time. Like he obviously paired Giannis and Brook together. They played this drop defense. They were like, limit everything at just you can't score at the rim, right? Like you're going to have to score somewhere else. It's just not going to be at the rim. Now, again, he was given these two guys that he could kind of work with, and that they were so good at it, right? This drop defense where Giannis can like sort of free safety and really cause you problems. He could look at this team and be like, hey, there's hallmarks, guys like Claxton and Clowney. Like there's guys on this team that I could make something else work, right? That we could have a defensive approach that could be really sound and and really stagnating. I think there are pieces where Budenholzer, again, it's not the exact personnel for sure, but guys who I think are sort of understand sort of stylistically the way they want to play I think you could help. I mean, I'm sure he would look at this team and be like, they have to play at faster pace, right? Like he was a faster pace coach. He'd have to say, like, we have to push the pace more a little bit with some of these guys. Like, it's just like, we have to get Claxton out in space. We got to get Clowney out in space. We have to have a guard. I mean, they don't have Simmons, but if we had to have some kind of guard that can like at least push, because those teams played pretty fast, right? Now they had a guy who was devastating in transition in Giannis, right? It's like you get him out in transition and it's just 2 points. So, right.
Yeah, and I think that's the deal. When you have a player like a model of player like Giannis, okay, just give me a Giannis. So can you accomplish it on the Brooklyn Nets with most of the roster you currently have? And what are the changes you're going to make? Where are the pivots you're going to go to this offseason? And are we both in agreement that if you hire a coach of his caliber, then something we disagreed with, using all the draft capital and going out and trading for players, now all of a sudden maybe you have to be on board with that and really dumping all the assets and saying the next 2-3 years is going to be a big push for this team to whatever success level, and then we'll recalibrate after that.
And one thing to remember, so the pushback too on Budenholzer here would be that, like, okay, well, he doesn't have those guys, and he showed that he wasn't able to sort of adjust at the times where it was most needed, right? And like, if you don't give him the exact same personnel, we showed he couldn't adjust one time with that really good core group. Can he play with a totally different group? But I don't think that's a fair criticism, really. I think that, like, or I mean, maybe it's fair, but it's not totally translatable. And the problem is sometimes,
right? Because you don't have the next sample of it to legitimize or delegitimize it, right?
No, of course. And like, my biggest thing where people come in, and most times I feel like it's because they're not really thoughtful about it, is that, well, they'll come in and say, I don't want to hire this guy because, he couldn't adjust and blah, he couldn't do all this stuff. One, most people, I'm forever convinced that the group of people that can tell what those meaningful adjustments in game are, like on a synthesized strategic level on a minute by minute basis, is the group's pretty small, right? Like you need to be really, really high level to know. Most people are just told that, right? Like they're just told he couldn't adjust, and then they sort of parrot it and then wash, rinse, repeat on the regurgitation around the criticisms around players. So like that's, or excuse me, around coaches, well, players too. So that's one thing. Two, the Nets aren't at this place where you would start nitpicking around Game 7,
it's not a great,
conference championship level adjustments that they need to make. They need a guy who's stable, who's respected, who has shown the ability to put in good schemes and systems before, and with like superstar level guys or not, and just capitalize on it. They need that now. I mean, the Nets are so far away from the very last stop on the Coach Budenholzer. Yeah, is he over-indexed on like doing the same thing over and over again? Maybe, but that only reared its ugly head in these 0.01 percentile outcomes, where at the very, very end of something already awesome that's happening. So I just really can't hear those criticisms at all. Does that make sense? Like, I actually find him.
You know what I don't like? You know what I don't like about Coach Bud is after he won the championship with the Milwaukee Bucks, the next opportunity he failed to make that, the next series of adjustments. Like, right, but he did the first thing.
Okay, fine. Guess what? We'll deal with that problem when we have. You know how far away from that problem we are? Like, it's like not even funny. It's like
happy problems. I'll take the championship.
You know how happy everyone will be to have. That's like, oh my God, this like $3 million landed in my bank account out of nowhere. But the taxes, am I right? You're like, hey, okay, yeah, that's going to kind of hurt. But you know what's also awesome? The 2.3 million you have now in your thing after taxes. So,
I guess, Doug, if you want to be an optimist, I suppose. Yeah.
That's really whatever the effective tax rate on the millions are. Like that's where I find it to be so. I just don't think you're putting any thought into it. I think you're just regurgitating something you heard from some talking head somewhere. And maybe we're talking heads too. I don't know, but I just don't think it just doesn't, it misses most of the landscape for that to be a criticism.
Yeah. And I think to give, I'll give that segment of the fan base, not a pass, but it's, hey, listen,
I'll give them a pass.
When you watch your organization make a lot of wrong moves, you know what I mean? Or make a lot of mistakes, then you're like, we're going to hire Coach Budenholzer. And you're like, well, what are the chances this works out? Right. Like, it's like you automatically think of, well, what's that little thing they talked about? He couldn't make adjustments, blah, blah, blah. And just to your point, hey, man, we're talking about this team making the playoffs and being competitive and maybe winning a playoff series in the short term. That we feel very confident Coach Budenholzer could accomplish for you. Guess what? They come up short and they look a little sloppy in the conference finals. I'll live with that going forward. The other part of this then, though, and we knew we were going to talk a lot about a veteran experienced coach that's won a championship and has Coaches of the Year awards under his belts. What about going the other way? What about Fernandez? What about Young? High level, highly potentially sought after assistant coaches on the market this offseason. What would that signal for the future of the Brooklyn Nets? And is that potentially just as bright a path to take? We'll dive in on that next.
All right. I've been told I'm a competitive person. You think that's true? We all got a competitive side. We all have it out there. And my competitive side is a big fan of Monopoly Go. I'm sure you heard about it. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. You heard that number, 150 million times. It's a great twist on Monopoly where you play on not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. Best part, it's messing with my friends. My friend Adam Arbrecht out there. I can change them. I charge them rent on those properties, just like the classic Monopoly. I rob the vaults for the richest, keep for myself, climb up the leaderboard to show who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is. It's not just about my competitive side. You can team up with friends and people all around the world in time tournaments to earn huge rewards. Get in the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play. Once again, download Monopoly Go for free on the App Store or Google Play.
Oh, baby, as we wrap up just a delightful little episode talking about the Brooklyn Nets getting into those coaching waters and maybe making a big splash that the franchise needs in a critical moment. And this obviously coming on the heels of Sean Marks getting the vote of confidence. He's not going anywhere. He's going to be sticking around. I should remind everybody, you should also be sticking around for Locked On NFL's Mock Draft live on April 17th at 7 p.m. It's streaming on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or on the Amazon Fire TV channel's app. You can find the ultimate 6-episode series on April 17th at 7 p.m. to hear who the local experts have picking for every single NFL team with live reactions from local college experts and even fantasy football angles as well. Locked On NFL Mock Draft, April 17th, 7 p.m., streaming live on Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel or on YouTube and free on Amazon Fire TV channel's app. Ooh, the draft. Something the Brooklyn Nets aren't going to be doing. Okay, the other thing for the Brooklyn Nets, Young, Fernandez, Sacramento Kings, Phoenix Suns, young talent, the future. Can you sign off on we're going to sign a young up-and-coming assistant head coach and put them in the driver's seat, and we have this young core, and we are just going to wait for Ben Simmons' contract to expire, and we are not going to look at Mikal Bridges or Cam Johnson as being core pieces for winning playoff basketball? Is that an acceptable path now that you've been given the aperitif of Coach Bud being out there?
So these are always trickier because you don't know for sure. Right. Like with Budenholzer, you know what the positives and you pretty much know what the negatives are ahead of time. Right. Like now you can know that around other head coaches too, and it cannot work out. So there's examples all over the map here around things that work and things that don't. Right. We just watched a guy in Adrian Griffin get the Bucks job and get his ouster, 10 minutes later himself. Right. So, and that guy came in really, really highly acclaimed.
Yeah.
And it just didn't work. And so, it's just, but then you got all the, Mark Daigneault, like he might win coach of the year this year. Right. And he was not a head coach till he hit OKC. And now he's considered maybe one of the best coaches in all of basketball. Mm-hmm. So it's a little harder to tell going in about what you're going to get. These guys, Jordi Fernandez, assistant coach for the Kings, and Kevin Young, assistant coach for the Suns, who was rumored to almost have the Suns head coaching job this offseason until they pivoted to Vogel. Many people thought that Young was going to get that job. These guys are considered the top of that list in terms of up-and-coming assistants. So I think you have to take it for what it's worth. Jordi Fernandez has focused a little bit more on the defensive side of the ball. Really, really highly respected guy. Seems by all intents and purposes that he would be really good. Kevin Young's been given a lot of credit for a lot of the progress that Devin Booker has made. So there's superlatives here for sure. It's just the only issue with these guys, and I'm not going to bring in any criticisms, but the most times you don't know what the criticisms would be because a lot of this is shielded, right? They're just not the head coach. And so I think that's the only tricky part. So it's not against them. Eventually you just have to hire one of these guys and trust your process. Has Sean Marks had a good process around this in the past? This is coach number 4. So I don't really know. It doesn't seem like it. Right? No, excuse me, 5. I mean, I'm
rolling the dice, baby. Come on. What do you think this is, Doug?
I guess I can't count. I mean, this will be his 5th coach. And so it's a little hard. It's just a little hard to maybe trust his, and maybe that's the guy that's the process we can't trust is Marks. He's on his 5th coach. But in general, that's like, those are the background for these two guys. I would say they hired him. I think we have to look at it and be like, hey, that was a good hire, but it's not because they have head coaching experience. And that's just sometimes the only problem.
Yeah, and I wonder, you mentioned like with Sean Marks, and then you hear in the Shams Charania article, excuse me, that Joe Tsai is going to be in on the final interviews for any of these candidates. So hopefully he has a hand in it as well for whatever that value offers.
Well, he was around for all those hires too, so I don't think that matters either.
Yeah.
Like that,
But,
so that's just put them both in the same tank. Like it just doesn't. He was around for all those. Like they're on their fifth coach. I guess Ollie's an interim coach, and maybe it doesn't totally count. But
yeah, but it might as well. Like it's
well,
fine.
but it might as well because you had like Vaughn as an interim and then not and then an assistant. So it's like I don't know. It's 5 coaches.
You know what? It's been 7 coaches. I'm giving him a couple extra because it's been so bad. No, and that's the tricky part because, and I mentioned that with Coach Bud, there's the experience, the track record, but the fact that the Brooklyn Nets are the team that hires them maybe then ends up having you go, is that the right move? Whereas if the Bucks hire the coach, whatever team, name team XYZ, ones that have tracker. If the Spurs hire a coach, which by the way, Coach Bud does have coaching ties back to the San Antonio Spurs and that staff. If you want to go Sean Marks, San Antonio, the full circle nature of what he likes to do. But that's the problem, is that the trust has been eroded between the fan base and the organization over these past handful of seasons, so that no matter what you choose to do, it's going to be filled with some level of second guessing. To your point, if you go with the young guys, if you go with the first-time head coaches, I think it does 2 things. One, it probably settles the fan base down if they're willing to accept that path as, okay, get through next year, get off the Ben Simmons contract, develop the young players. Let's get some picks coming in here from the other teams. All right, we understand where we're headed. It will be different if it's Bud, because then immediately any fan that was already saying go get Donovan Mitchell is going to be like, well, he should already be on the plane then. Like, what are we even talking about? He's here, right? It's going to be it. I'll ask you, would it be Coach Bud gets hired, offseason becomes critical, and this team needs to make the playoffs and will probably have an expectation of having like a more than unreasonable chance or expectation to win a playoff series? That will at least be the conversation they'll start immediately if it's Bud, and then we assume it's Donovan Mitchell, it's player XYZ, and they start to reshape this roster.
I think it'll more signal the first thing you said, which is like there's a bigger, we're for sure in superstar coming mode. I think we're pretty much there anyway, or at least superstar attempt mode. I think they're there anyway, but that would, any side of the doubt ledger would erase that, I think.
And let's stay right there. It would also start to change the perspective on some of the young players, right? Veteran head coach comes in. You want to make big moves in the offseason. Every young, talented player becomes more available for those types of decisions than maybe if you're going, younger developmental track and holding off another year.
I will say the one difference, the one reason maybe, I mean, like you want to look at, if you're looking at another example of this is like Monty Williams, who left walked into a young rebuilding situation himself. Now he got paid all the money in the world. And I think maybe that's what swayed him, but they were taking a slightly different approach. Although a good example.
I heard Monty said, just real quick, and this is a part of the interview process for Detroit, they said, we're going to give you like $40 million a year. And he goes, yeah, but after taxes, that's like $25 million. I don't even know if that's really worth it.
You know, the tax rate of Michigan is, but also you get that totally failed too. I mean, that guy was like one of the most well-respected guys in all of basketball, and Pistons fans just dreading the next, 8 years or whatever he's going to be there. So it's these things you just never really know. I will say I'm with you on the first part though, where if they hired Budenholzer, to me that would be such a clear signal. With the other two guys, I think that the paths still could be divergent, and I wouldn't know exactly which direction it was going. Yeah. But with him, I think we would be very clear. And I think that's one other interesting subplot.
Yeah, it makes for a fascinating offseason, obviously. At a minimum, man, hearing Coach Budenholzer's name get put into this mix, hearing that the Brooklyn Nets in the front office, which, by the way, yes, Sean Marks is sticking around. Well, of course he is, because him and Joe Tsai have been talking to coaching candidates all throughout the back end of this season. So I like the fact that the wheels have been in motion here and that they're not coming into it's still the season. It's going into play-in tournaments, going to playoff time. I like the fact that we're hearing about this now, because every other time that they've had to make a critical decision, it always felt like somebody else started to say something, and then the Nets got in on the discussion and tried to figure out the best path forward. Looks like they're being as proactive as possible here, coming out of, as we keep saying, a very disappointing season based on expectations.
All right, we're going to get out of here. Much appreciated. Like, we didn't say this after the last podcast, but really appreciate everyone that rode all 82 games with us this year. It was a really fun time. It's fun time talking Nets. Not every night was fun to talk about the on-court product, but look, getting to talk the Nets every single day and hoops in general is just a good time. So really appreciate everyone that was along for the 82 game ride, and let you know that we will be coming 5 days a week, all the way through the playoffs, all the way through the draft, no matter what. We'll be talking coaching searches, we'll give player grades, we'll go through some of these exit interviews that the players gave. A lot of really interesting stuff out there. 5 days a week, Locked On Nets.
Put that coffee down. Coffee is for closers, and I don't see any closers here. Why, that's Blake from Glengarry Glen Ross.
One of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.